My name is Jeff Gramlich. I hold the Hoops, Howard and Phyllis Hoops Endowed Chair. When they gave money to the university in 2012, they set aside part of the gift for something called the Hoops Tax Forum. And Hoops Tax Forum is organizing this event, as well as you may recall in the spring, I think, or last year, we had Representative Ed Orcutt. And before that, we had Senator Frames. People that are involved, at least recently, with Washington State taxes. And let me just tell you a little bit about Mike. He's been the Washington State Treasurer since 2021. He was elected in 2020, defeating Dwayne Davidson, a Republican. In fact, he was the only Democratic candidate to defeat a Republican incumbent in a statewide election in 2020 across the United States. At 42 years old at the time, Mike was the youngest Washington statewide elected official. And today, to this date, my understanding, has never accepted a corporate contribution. Is that still
corporate campaign donation? That's true.
Campaign contribution.
They don't all.
I think you're going to, I've had the pleasure of visiting with Mike over the last hour or so. I think you're going to find he is very much interested in investing in the future of Washington. And I'll let him speak to that. But one of the things that he, as a state treasurer, sort of sponsored or invited, how did you introduce legislation you created the Washington that created the Washington Saves program? And he'll tell you a little bit about that. It's basically a retirement program for people that work for companies that don't have retirement programs. And I'll let Mike talk a little bit more, but he's had a lot of great ideas about investing in the future. Mike, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Professor. So can you all hear me okay?
Oh, we need to have you use the mic.
I have the wireless on, so everyone can hear me all right?
Well, let me just explain that, and then I'll get out of the way. We have a Zoom audience. We have, as you know, about half of our students and accounting majors are not here in Pullman. They're on the global campus, and they are Zooming in. And so we have, there's some slides that are gone now. Maybe Rob can put it up there again. I don't know. Yeah. When you want to ask a question, please text this number. And if you want to interact with Mike, I'll bring the mic around, this microphone around to you. But if you would just send a text to that number, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the room or you're in Olympia or someplace else and you're still participating, you can still ask a question and I will convey that question.
Okay. And again, everyone can hear me all right, correct? Great. Well, it is so great to join all of you. My name is Mike Pellicciotti. I'm your state treasurer. I really appreciate you joining all today. I'm sure some of you are here in your classes, whatever the case may be. I do know there is a Mariners game starting soon. I take no offense if you want to be watching the game at times. The only rule I have is that the Mariners score, you raise your hand and let us know. If that happens, that would actually be super appreciated. It is great to be here on the Washington State campus. Thank you to Professor Gramlich. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you today. Thank you for the Hoop Tax Forum for the opportunity to join all of you today. I'm going to start, talking a little bit just about what the Treasurer's Office does. Because most folks are like, hey, we have a state treasurer. That probably makes sense. It has something to do with money, which is all true, by the way. But I'll talk a little bit about what the office does, some of the things we're working on, and then I'm going to jump into just some of the issues we're leading on nationally. There's a lot going on right now, and who here actually is studying business in some way, either accounting or anything along those lines? Okay, great. But don't worry about it. If you didn't have your hands up, that's fine too. It's actually there's never been a time in which so much stuff is just kind of blending together on these issues, and especially on issues related to public finance today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues we're working on in the Treasurer's Office, just also what we're dealing with nationally in terms of the federal government, some issues along those lines. And then what I'm going to do is open up for questions, which I actually find to be the best use of time at the end of the discussion there. But I want to start first with the Treasurer's Office, right? We kind of have three core functions. One is I handle certain investments for the state of Washington. So I invest about $35 billion of state and local funds. And really kind of the goal in that work is trying to find a way to kind of maximize the return in a safe way for the funds tax dollars that we have. That's kind of the first core function. Second core function is I handle something called debt management. And I'm going to break that down a little bit for you. Every legislature meets, legislature determines different projects to do. And as a part of that effort, whether it's a new university building, a ferry, a bridge, an actual tangible physical item, those are funded through the issuance of things called bonds. You've heard of the idea of bonds before? Have you heard that, like school bonds, different things like that? Essentially, bonds are a fancy way of saying the government is borrowing money up front to build that particular project, right? So you get the money up front, you build this, student union, school building, bridge, road, ferry, whatever the case may be, and then over the life of that physical, tangible thing, you pay it back. It's kind of like if you're over the age of 50, you can get a mortgage, so you actually own a house. So kind of like get the mortgage, you get the money up front, you pay it back over the life of the house. It's kind of a car loan, you get the money up front, you get the car, you pay back over the life of the car. It's the same concept of government. They get the money up front, they pay it back. But here's the thing, it very much is a form of debt, right? It needs to be paid back. Well, it's generally viewed to be a responsible form of financing. It still very much is debt, needs to be paid back. I have to determine as treasurer what those actual projects are. It's between you and your legislators, right? You elect legislators, they control the purse, they determine, do we want this bridge, do we want this road, do we want this ferry, whatever the case may be. But my job as treasurer is actually issue the bonds to get the best financing, to pay the lowest interest rate. The whole idea, like interest rates low, that's good if you're borrowing money. Interest rates high, it's good if you're saving money. And that's a big focus of mine, is to kind of manage those bonds that actually issue. But that matters because you're such huge amounts of money. If you actually put it in the best interest of the people, you're getting a lot of money back if you're not wasting it and sending money to banks on interest rates. And that's kind of what I was talking with Professor Graham was talking about. Someone who's always rejected all corporate campaign donations since first running for office. Kind of what I get the most joy in is getting money back to people. It's like kind of big focus of mine. The more you can kind of finance things in a way that gets money back to people, the more good that happens. And it's things like this, folks. It's the kind of the complicated financial structures, these legal financial issues, is the difference between things either happening or not happening, having the funds to do what you want to do or not, or funds getting to the people or not. And that's kind of what I really enjoy about the job as state treasurer, is being able to kind of focus on a lot of those issues that kind of gets money back to the people in ways that work. So that's kind of the second core function of the job, this debt management, again, the kind of the issuance of the bonds. And for the previously issued bonds, which is about $21 billion or so of previously issued bonds, managing those in a way that works and in the best interest of the people. Third kind of core function is I serve as a state treasurer, right? So cash flow, money in and money out, right? Most of the checks in the state of Washington, trying to transfer, whatever the case may be, it's about $250 billion a year in cash flow in the state of Washington in and out in any given year. So it kind of gives you some idea of those core functions. One of the other things that is kind of part of the job that the legislature has tasked me with doing is serving on certain boards and commissions that handle other financial policy issues, things you may or may not be familiar with, like our GIT program. Is anyone familiar with our GIT program, 529 program? Maybe parents or grandparents can invest in kind of your education, give you opportunities on that. Serve on boards and commissions that invest pension funds. We have about $200 billion pension portfolio that we invest. Things related to banking regulation, small business tax credits, housing financing, in terms of affordable housing developments, all those different things. It's the money that makes it all work or not work, depending on kind of what the goal is and what you're trying to make happen. But I feel like foundationally, we're doing things pretty well in terms of investments. When I came into office in 2021, one of my big things that I was focused on was raising the alarm that I thought inflation would not be transitory, meaning we'd see inflation for a period of time. And if we were going to see inflation for a period of time, that meant the Federal Reserve would have to increase interest rates to stem that inflationary pressure. And if they increase interest rates, that affects like everything we do in the treasurer's office, right? It affects the investment side of the house, the investments we're doing, affects the debt management side of the house, like we're issuing bonds, and interest rates affect that. So a big focus of mine during that first year in office in 2021 was refinancing every bit of debt we could legally refinance in the state of Washington. So when we talk about that, everyone kind of heard of the concept of like refinancing mortgage, right? Like interest rates are low, you want to lock in those lower rates. That's what we did with the state. And that was my big focus. My first year was kind of like pedal to the metal, refinancing every bit of debt, locking in those lower interest rates. And in doing so, we've now saved the people of the state of Washington $787.5 million in just like net value savings, just by refinancing every bit of debt we could legally refinance, locking that stuff in, and then setting it up. Essentially, that's money that is now like literally going to people that was otherwise being burned, absolutely burned and wasted. Interest payments. And, when I was in the legislature for a couple terms before becoming treasurer, it always felt like we were like $500,000 short of whatever project or important thing was important in your community. That's what I love about this job now. Is when you do this stuff the right way, like literally we're talking over $750 million by just refinancing something that makes big things happen. In a really exciting way once you connect those dots. Once you connect the dots between money and things happening, you realize that money heading to the people instead of being wasted to banks or in interest payments, whatever the case may be, is that actually things happen or not and meeting the needs of the community. But it also means we actually hug that interest rate curve very tightly on the investment side of the house. So that's what happens when interest rates went up. We hug that interest rate curve, meaning our interest rate returns kind of track the interest rates that went up. And that means extra 30 times the return compared to just 4 years ago daily interest rates. That means extra $3 million more in debt going to local governments through the investment efforts that we had. With that, it means an extra $2 billion in the next 4 years going to the state of Washington just on the funds that we're investing. Like again, I just want to be like absolutely clear. When you do this stuff well, and that's why I really appreciate those who are interested in business or studying business now. Like it has a huge impact, especially in public finance. When you bring those skills to bear, like it makes it's a huge component of public service if you can make this stuff work for the people and in the best interest of the people related to these things. And not enough folks in government actually understand how this works, elected officials included, right? I mean, it's just stuff can be complicated. I think far too often there are terms used in finance in general to make it kind of exclusionary in a way that people don't understand what's going on. It's like only a few people can actually use the language to kind of talk about this stuff. But the more you demystify this stuff, the more it actually is a key tool for empowerment. And that's why, I kind of have a core, like 3 core beliefs. In addition to doing a lot of this foundational stuff well, I just feel foundationally that everyone should have economic opportunity at birth. They should have the tools to economically thrive throughout their career. And they should have the dignity of retirement security late in life. They're not crazy concepts. These are like foundational American market concepts. And the only way you actually address those issues, though, is actually through policy. And understanding what's happening, understanding the financial markets, understanding public finance, and then putting that in a path to actually address those issues. And so since becoming treasurer, I've put forward 3 pieces of legislation to address each of those concepts. The first, as it relates to economic opportunity at birth. So I propose the idea of baby bonds. Baby bonds is essentially, calling on the legislature to set aside $4,000 in the name of every child born pursuant to an Apple Health funded birth, which is about half the births in our state. It's 2 out of 3 in rural Washington. It's 3 out of 4 in several rural counties, including this county. And it would allow for funds to be set aside and then invested at birth. In the same way, any loving parent or grandparent, when they have the financial means to do so, as they set up the child's born, they set up a savings account that kid, or maybe buy some stocks or bonds or whatever the case may be. Well, for half the kids being born today, their parents and grandparents are no less loving. They would if they could. They would do it if they knew how to do it. But the reality is within literally days of one's birth, they're 2 different trajectories. There are those kids who have those foundational things in place that allow for those kids, when they are young adults, to essentially remove the capital barriers that often deny access to opportunity, deny access to wealth generation, and also create kind of a death spiral actually early in one's life. Then there are those who have the resources to remove those capital barriers, and then you have those who don't. And those capital barriers often deny, even when kids into young adults do everything right, whatever that means. They do everything right. Those capital barriers are there. Capital barriers are there in terms of educational opportunities. Capital barriers are there if you want to start a small business. Those capital barriers are there if you want to own property. And so the idea of baby bonds is to essentially remove those capital barriers, in which it's not like someone would get a check, the money grows, that money's there from age 18 to 35, where it can be directed toward one of those three wealth building, kind of defined wealth building paths, as it relates to education. Be used for education pursuits, like a great institution like Wazoo here. Be used for someone who wants to go do trades and apprenticeships. I often talk to a lot of folks around the state. I've been to each of our 39 counties. I talk to folks all the time. They're like, yeah, I'd like to do an apprenticeship, but I was told I got to do 3 or 4 months of unpaid pre-apprenticeship. Well, tell someone, they got to go 3 or 4 months when they got no income coming in. They'll be like, oh, just go 3 or 4 months without any income. Well, they're like, sorry, I need a job, right? I got to get a job. I got to put a roof over my head. I got to eat. That often puts someone on a different path where they're getting a job that might not lead to wealth creation over time in the same way, let's say, doing an apprenticeship, right? Where you're developing a skill set that allows for career progression, or going to a university where obviously it'll develop the training that comes from here. And so it can be used to remove those capital barriers that often deny access to those opportunities. It can be used for small business creation. So that someone, you can have the best business model in the world. You might be here in Washington State, you work on a business model for a year, you have a game plan, you know your community, you know what they need, you chart it out, you go to the school, you go to the bank, and you say, hey, here's my business plan. They're like, hey, that is a great idea. I think that's going to work. And the next thing they're going to say is, where's your seed money? Where's your skin game? You're like, oh yeah, about that. I don't have any capital. They're like, all right, come talk to us in several years when you do. But again, if somebody has the capital, the cash, right, from a parent, a loan, whatever it is, suddenly they have that small down payment to be able to have that seed money to have that small business creation. Again, it's all about just removing the capital barriers to deny people their full kind of God-given potential, whatever it is that they want to do. And then the third is related to property ownership, where it can be used to provide, essentially down payment assistance. Because I talk to a lot of folks, and those folks are like, hey, I wouldn't mind having a house. That sounds good. Where's my down? You need a down payment, right? But again, if you're in that cycle, especially when you're in a cycle like that, you're barely paying rent, things are more expensive. You're just constantly churning. You're not able to get the kind of wealth generation that comes from that. But through our baby bonds proposal, I was talking to the professor about this earlier today. In 37 of the 39 counties, you could afford a house if you're FHA loan eligible through this baby bonds proposal. Meaning that if you were a young adult, there would be enough to afford a house in the 37 of our 39 counties. Again, things that are key to generational wealth creation and being able to address a lot of these issues. So I point that out. It's just one proposal we're putting forward to address economic opportunity. When I'm talking about the tools to economically thrive for everyone's career, I believe very strongly the most effective tool for that, something we need a lot more of, which is financial education today. Who here has actually had a financial education or financial literacy course? How about before you showed up to Washington State? Okay, I'm seeing about 6, 7 hands. We are now one of a minority of states, Washington State, one of a minority of states that does not require financial education. That is crazy. That is crazy. And it is a key component to economic empowerment. A key component of economic empowerment. You should not be reliant on how good your parents are with finances as to whether or not you can navigate the world. And a lot of you might say, oh, I talked to my dad, I talked to my mom, she kind of helped me figure this out. There are a lot of folks who actually are providing that financial education to their parents. And again, you shouldn't be just simply relying on how good your parents are with money as to whether or not you are able to navigate the world today. We ask a lot, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Sign here, sign that. But we don't ever explain the difference between a grant or a loan and the impact of that. Or how interest rates are good when you are saving money and bad when you are borrowing money. And really bad if you have a credit card. But instead we're just like, oh, you want to buy something? Here's a credit card. Sign here. All you know is to buy. You don't understand the idea of 30% interest per year is going to do you a lot of harm. That $100 purchase through 10 years is going to cost you $400 for that thing that you bought 10 years ago. Like these are the foundational things that are key to economic empowerment, but also are just foundational to deny that opportunity to thrive economically. Because if you don't have that framework, it's not going to kind of come together. It's been one of the things I was thinking about it just yesterday when I was driving in, because I was driving through Washington on Highway 26, and I've been previously there. And in that town, the last bank moved out of there like in the last 10 years. last bank moved out of Washington, not because it wanted to, not because, it was like, hey, we just want to move somewhere else, is because there was not capital in that community to invest in small business creation. No one was getting, the seed money for small business. The capital wasn't there for the homeowners to buy first-time homes. And that's what happens when that capital gets extracted. In a lot of cases, it's moved into the cities. Right? If you look over the last 30 to 40 years, a lot of my background is in rural economic development. I mean, over that period of the last couple of decades, that money has been kind of sucked out of rural communities and often goes into kind of urban centers. Well, again, if the capital is not there to be invested, that has a huge impact. And I say all that because, when you talk to folks, you talk to a 13 or 14-year-old going to high school, you talk to them, you talk about financial education. Well, okay, you can talk about interest rates and compound interest. They're like, compound what? I got no money. My friends have no money. My parents have no money. My friends' parents have no money. Like, compound what? Like, you're not meeting people where they're at. This is why baby bonds to me is this all kind of fits together. Because when you're talking about real opportunity, real money, when you're now talking about financial education, it is very real to that person. If you're actually talking about what their future looks like and how that can all fit together. And so when I talk about these things, I believe these all fit together. It's why I'm going to be calling on the legislature this year to finally require that financial education be taught in our schools. It is past time for that. It is a key component to economic empowerment. And the biggest champions for this effort actually are our high school students. It's the high school students who often come to the legislature in support of these policies and say, why aren't you providing this to us? Like, you are letting us down. Adults, you are letting us down. This is a foundational thing. Even we know, we need to know, and yet you are not teaching it to us. And so that is going to be legislation we're going to bring forward as kind of the second policy thing to deal with that second core belief of economic or the ability to economically thrive throughout one's career. Now, the third thing is actually something we did accomplish last year, which is retirement security later in life. Because here's the reality. 2 out of 3 millennials have 0 retirement savings. It is worse for Gen Z, right? Like, we were going in a direction where it used to be you got a job and you didn't have to even ask about it. You had a retirement package. That stuff was there. That's the challenge. When you are in your early 20s, when you should be thinking about retirement savings the most is when you are thinking about it the least. Because if you have money early as part of a retirement option, if that money grows, and you're almost guaranteed to be a millionaire, just put even a small amount of money in your checking account aside and invest it wisely throughout your life. Almost guaranteed. But we now have it set up where people are not even given the opportunity to create a retirement option for themselves. And so what our office put forward was Washington Saves. And Washington Saves, the whole idea is it's called an automatic IRA. Has anyone heard of like an IRA before? Right? IRA, it's a little bit different than a 401k, in which it's, the employer cannot contribute. It's just an employee contributing. But it creates an automatic IRA for 1.2 million Washingtonians, where they now have essentially an opt-out IRA system, meaning the money is automatically saved on their behalf. They can opt out if they want to. They're not required to be a part of it. But it will essentially allow for funds to be essentially responsibly invested on their behalf and allow for it to grow as soon as they start earning money. Because when I started going around the state on this potential retirement crisis that we were facing, I started going around the state and saying, hey, what should we do about this? Most folks are like, yeah, retirement, I know that's important, but I just don't really understand it. It's just really complicated. I got a lot going on in my life. Like, it's just a lot to take in. All I know is it needs to be easy. It needs to be easy for me. And the employers are like, it has to be easy for me as an employer. And folks are like, I want to make sure that money is responsibly invested. I don't want to have to worry what the latest trend is on TikTok as to whether or not, like, where I should put my money, which, by the way, not advisable for the latest trend on how to invest using TikTok or YouTube or anything like that. But, money responsibly invested over time is going to grow. And what we found was by setting up this retirement option, we now have it starting next year that 1.2 million Washingtonians are going to have a retirement option. And it is particularly transformative to those actually of a lower income, because they are the ones who are least likely to actually set up a savings account like this. It's overwhelming. There's a lot going on, and they have smaller amounts to be invested. And so they're not thinking that someone would want to invest a relatively small amount of their check every month. But again, what we find is that for those folks that, it's about half of Americans now cannot afford an unexpected payment of $400 or more.
Let me say that again. About half of Americans cannot afford an unexpected payment of $400 or more. Meaning if your car breaks down, that is catastrophic to your life and your future and what you can navigate during that day. And a lot of folks are able to kind of make things work, do makeshift things and all that. But that is overwhelming when you're just trying to put one foot in front of the other on a given day. You can't plan, you can't think long term, you can't do the long-term investing and kind of vision for yourself that truly is the distinguishing aspect to allow for wealth creation and empowerment throughout one's life. And that's why I work so hard at trying to get more money back to the people and giving them the tools, because for those who have participated in similar automatic IRA programs around the country, they have found that those of the lower income are the most empowered, because after a short amount of time, even just after a couple months, they start having a couple of $1,000s that have been saved up. And what's been so interesting is that when we do interviews of folks who have done that, just knowing that that money is there completely changes their perspective on navigating the day and lowering the stress levels of what they're navigating. Because the number one factor now to negative health outcomes for Americans, number one health outcomes. Anyone have any idea? It's not smoking. It's not like, what do you think the number one factor is? Economic stress. Number one factor to negative health outcomes today in the United States. And so I point all of this out, which is like, follow the money. And if you set this up in a way that actually empowers people financially, it has a transformative impact. And it ultimately has an impact on their overall state of not having fewer healthcare costs and all those things. There are positive impacts. But it was folks at the lowest income who really had a different outlook on life every day when they would go out there, knowing just they had that nest egg of a couple $1,000s completely changed their perspective of the risk that they were facing during the day. And that's what we've put forward here in Washington successfully now to deal with the retirement security later in life. So I point those out just as like, even somebody like Treasurer can put forward policies that truly kind of can transform things. I really want to highlight how important it is for all of you who are being educated on issues of finance today. When I say finance, I mean the broad context, accounting, business, and all of that. Because that is really a critical tool that is often overlooked. And I think too many people also look at these issues not as public service. And those who are in public finance today, I can assure you very much view it as public service. And it's so critical. When I talk about folks in my office, we are one of the smaller state agencies. It's only about 70 folks in the office of the state treasurer. But these are very, very talented folks. And when I talk about, $750 million through refinancing, $3 million more a day for local governments, like that is just through the work of very talented folks doing this work and getting money back to the people in a way that really is transformative and I think makes a big difference. And it's all good news, which is when you do those things well, now for the second year in a row, U.S. News and World Report has rated Washington State #1 in the nation for long-term fiscal stability. Second year in a row, just a couple months ago. Our credit ratings, which you're kind of familiar with credit ratings. It's the idea of like you all have an individual credit score. Credit score determines whether you can borrow money, at how much money you can borrow, at what interest rate you borrow money. Well, we get a credit score as well as a state, but it's called a credit rating. And the whole idea is Moody's is one of the preeminent credit rating agencies. They determine a lot of factors related to kind of debt and reserves and pension funding, things like that. And they just reaffirmed a AAA credit rating for the state of Washington, which is the top credit rating that you can have. Is a good mark of good financial health, like high five, that feels good. But that also is critical because then that's what we rely on to have a lower interest rates on when we borrow the money on the bonds, which means more bang for the buck, which means you get 2 buildings here on the Wazoo campus instead of 1 for the same amount of debt that's taken out. That's what happens when you watch those interest rates in a way that makes a big difference. And again, that's why it's also public service oriented, because when you actually handle and manage this money in a responsible way, in a way that best serves the people's interest, good things happen, right? You get 2 buildings instead of 1, like high five, like that's great. But I mentioned this financial strength as I kind of go into the next part of this conversation, which is the thing I've been working on for the last year, which is it's going to take every bit of that financial strength to weather the economic storms that are on the horizon. And, last August, over a year ago now, I started meeting with folks in the office of the state treasurer. And I went to folks in my office and I said, I think there is a possibility that we are going to see another Trump administration. And I think that the administration, if elected, will unlawfully withhold federal dollars from the state of Washington. And I knew this to be likely the case because the previous head of the White House Budget Office for the previous Trump administration someone named Russell Vogt. And Russell Vogt, who was the head of the White House Budget Office, had withheld money unlawfully from the city of Seattle in September of 2020. The reality is nobody kind of remembered that because there was a lot of crazy stuff going on in the fall of 2020, and it just wasn't one of the things that kind of was on people's minds. But I read Project 2025, and it was pretty clear that was the strategy and how that was going to play out. And so I went to the folks in the Office of the State Treasurer here in Washington, and I said, I hope this is the biggest colossal waste of time on any issue that we work on in the history of the State Treasurer's office, but we need to start preparing for this potential eventuality. And, unfortunately, it's been some of the most efficient use of time that we could possibly spend on an issue. Last fall, I started calling my colleagues around the country, other state treasurers and state comptrollers, state financial officers, who are elected in their respective states. And I said, I'm worried that this is going to be the path and what we're going to see. And they said to me, Mike, they said, well, if a President Trump does that, that would just be unlawful. And I said, I know. And then I called up folks at the Biden White House with the White House Budget Office there and said, hey, I'm worried that a new Trump administration will unlawfully withhold money from the state of Washington and other states around the country. And they said, well, Mike, if a President Trump does that, that's just going to be in violation of the Impoundment Act. The Constitution is absolutely clear on this. There's no question that would be unlawful. I'm like I know. Why do people keep telling me this? I'm tracking that. But that's what we need to be prepared for, because the reality is the unlawful withholding of federal dollars, even if unlawful, has a coercive impact, even if the law is on your side. I don't know if anyone is or your family's ever been involved in a lawsuit before. You don't file a lawsuit and then the next day, the court calls you up and says, hey, we saw you filed that lawsuit. Congratulations, you win. High five. No, it takes months or years. It's protracted litigation. And that's assuming you don't have some constitutional issue that has to go through the appellate courts. It takes time. And that was my concern, because the state of Washington receives $27.4 billion a year from the federal government. About $20 billion of that, $27.4 billion, is Medicaid or Apple Health dollars. Now, look, as individual taxpayers to the federal government, in Washington State, we contribute more as individual federal taxpayers directly to the federal government than the state of Washington receives. But that money goes directly to the federal government, and as individual taxpayers, you write it to the United States Treasury. It doesn't go through the state at all. And then the money that comes in, though, is impactful. $27.4 billion is real money, and no state can absorb a loss of $27.4 billion. So unlawfully withholding that money is, even if unlawful, has a coercive impact. And we've seen how that's played out. We've seen how it's played out with universities, withhold the money. Folks in universities know. They know what the law is. These are smart folks. But they've rolled over because they're not in a position of financial strength. We've seen it at law firms. Trust me, they know what the law is on this. And they're rolling over because they're not in a position of financial strength. We've seen media companies change their entire programming schedule, again, for a lack of financial strength and financial weakness, just purely through these unlawful actions that are coercive. And the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution is absolutely clear. There's no debate, you don't even, Constitutional 101, 10th Amendment of the Constitution is absolutely clear that the federal government cannot coerce or essentially have control over certain policymaking that rests with the states. So the federal government has a lot of power, for good reason, on certain issues. There are issues the federal government has no control over. Individual states decide for themselves. That is as well established as it gets under the 10th Amendment. So that's why the coercive impact, and this was laid out in Project 2025, was set up to essentially say, well, even if it's unlawful, by withholding this money, it forces the states to take actions contrary to the will of the people within that state, the residents of those states. Our entire system is set up to protect that state sovereignty related to that. But these are policy issues that have nothing to do with the federal government that could be, forced to be changed if you are withholding money. Now, why does that matter? Well, if you withhold $27.4 billion, the state of Washington can only last about 5 months without that money before it's insolvent. What does that mean? It means that suddenly checks coming from State Treasury are IOUs. Well, if you're working, you're a ferry worker, you're a construction worker, you're a teacher, professor at Wazoo, right? Or you're waiting on some type of financial support, or you're getting some state aid here as a student. That money stops showing up. This goes back to my point. Half of Americans can't afford an unexpected payment of $400 or more. You're going to be like, yeah, I like vote by mail, but Governor Ferguson, like, sorry, like I got to get paid. Like I got to pay my rent. I got to eat this week. Like I need my check. You know, same with reproductive rights, right? Like, hey, like, yeah, I agree with that, but like, sorry, I got to eat. I got to get paid. You know, you can say that about literally 20 or 30 other policy issues, and it won't stop. It won't stop. And that's why this is so serious. And this is also what we've been preparing for since August in our office, and why I've been working and helping lead these issues nationally with other state treasurer and financial officers around the country. Because I feel very, very strongly, not only in protecting the Constitution and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, but also making sure that we keep Washington State, you know, a great place to live in the way that the people of the state of Washington determined that it should be a great place to live. Whatever it is. Like, it's not for me as treasurer to decide what those laws are, but my goal as treasurer is to make sure I preserve and shield our state from the unlawful withholding of federal funds. Now, let me be clear. This is different than the lawful reduction of federal funds. You know, Congress just passed a bill a couple months ago. They lowered Medicaid expenses. They lowered SNAP benefits. That elections have consequences. That's how that works, right? If you don't like it, you can change the folks who represent you related to those issues. But when that happens, that reduction of those federal dollars happens over an extended period of time. That's how it always works. They're setting it up actually that the reductions don't come until after the next congressional election. Kind of funny how that works sometimes. But that gives states a chance to react to that. That's much different than, like, literally overnight waking up to a tweet that is blocking $27.4 billion unlawfully. Because at the end of the day, Congress controls the purse, not the executive branch. I'm in the executive branch as treasurer. I mean, we were talking before about the importance of ethical accounting when I was meeting with the professor earlier today. Well, as treasurer in the executive branch, the legislature controls the purse. They decide where that money goes. And then my job as treasurer is simply to write that check, right? Like, they say this money goes to, you know, build this new building at University of Washington. I don't decide and say, hey, I had a great meeting at the Carson school. I'm going to just change University of Washington and change it to Wazoo. Even though it's been a good meeting so far here this week. Like that's not how that works, right? My job is to write the check as the legislature has directed it. And it's no different when Congress writes something. When Congress, on behalf of the people, decides where that money goes, that is up to Congress to decide where that money goes. And it's the job of the executive branch of the U.S. Treasury to write the check as directed by Congress. And that's the unlawful aspect. It's when you have the president, the White House, or the White House Budget Office in this case, directing U.S. Treasury not to write a check or to send it somewhere else or to block funding. That is the unlawful aspect. And that's what I've been preparing for and why we need to shield our state to be able to navigate those issues so effectively. And so that has obviously been a big part of the work we've done. The good news is when the president blocked all federal dollars to the state of Washington on January 28th, we were ready. And we and the other states that we had been working with for several months had our lawsuit material ready to go. And within 48 hours, a federal judge in Rhode Island turned that money back on. It's also why, we continue to respond to other economic issues related to tariffs, for example, which are obviously, I believe, having a negative impact on the overall economic conditions of our state and states around the country. That's why I've joined with the governor in having a lawsuit, a legal argument, I should say, to argue about the recklessly imposed tariffs that are being unlawfully, again, tariffs. Look at the Constitution, right? It literally says tariffs in the Constitution is to be a responsibility of Congress. It's not up to the president to essentially usurp that power of Congress related to that. And that's one of the things that we're calling out as well. So again, there is a difference between lawful reductions in federal funds or lawful actions by Congress. Elections have consequences. I'm talking about the unlawful actions by the president that we're going to continue to make sure we stand up to, because, as it relates to tariffs, we've had 2 federal courts now agree with us, U.S. Court of Appeals about a month ago. And in November, the U.S. Supreme Court's going to be hearing the argument related to that. And I hope they follow our rationale related to that. So I point all that out because issues of public finance, issues of accounting, issues of money have never been more important today. And we're starting to finally connect the dots related to it. And I think it's something that's that much more important to talk about as we kind of preserve taxpayer dollars in a way that best meets the expectation. And we allocate those funds as directed by the legislative bodies in a way that best meets the expectations of the people. It's never been more important to have good ethical leadership in these roles and connect these dots between the legal aspects and the foundational kind of good business aspects as well. So I'm going to pause for a moment because I could keep on going, but I really want to get I find the questions the best use of time, and I'd love to see if you have any questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Rob. Please send a text there, and I will read that question out. If you're at home in zooming in, or just send a text. I have one just to start things off. Did I hear you right that by investing wisely, the state earned $2 billion more during the refi times when the low interest rates, you saved about $780 million?
Yeah, that's about right. About that, a little south of that.
I calculate that to be $350 per resident of Washington. And I don't know, but I suspect that there's people in here that are accounting and finance majors that are interested in public service and want to know, how can I, as an accounting major or a finance major, get involved and do something good for my home? What departments where can they use their talent?
Well, I think foundationally, understanding the issues makes you more effective at whatever it is you want to do, either personally in your life or in a form of public service. Because taking the time as you are to be exposed to these issues, I'm sorry, if you're showing up to a tax forum here, like you're either taking a class where this is like part of what you're talking about, or you're here when you got a lot of other stuff going on, I'm telling you, you're ready where you want to be on this issue. But I do think it's foundationally important because, like I was saying before, I think there's almost like not quite intentional, but it is kind of deliberate attempt to make the language and these issues so confusing and something that almost just seems too much to understand. And I am telling you, spend the time that you are wrapping your mind around these issues, just finance and money in general, and it will make you more effective at whatever it is that you want to do. And I would hope it is in something like public service because, there's always a lot of money to be made for the folks who understand these things, but there's a lot more money to be made for the people if you do it as a form of public service and use your talents toward that aim. And I think that all matters a lot. Now, you're also talking about getting money back to people. I always like it whenever I have a group of at least 20 or 30 people, I want to introduce you to something called unclaimed property, which is essentially unclaimed cash, which is 1 in 4 Washingtonians. 1 in 4 Washingtonians have unclaimed money they don't know about. And most folks are like, oh, that's not me, right? I'm telling you, billions of dollars in unclaimed money. Let me tell you where it comes from. There's some where maybe somebody had like a safety deposit box or whatever. They had a savings account, their grandma's savings account or something like that. But what's more likely is you've lived in an apartment at some point and you paid a deposit for your energy. Well, guess what? You moved and they sent your deposit back to you and you don't live there anymore. And that check went stale and you've moved on, you've gone to another apartment. That money doesn't belong to the company. And when it's not cashed, ultimately they give it to the state in your name to then find. So feel free to check out right now. It's called claimyourcash.org, claimyourcash.org. There is a 1 in 4 chance, it's actually a 1 in 2 chance that you have a family member who has some money there. So claimyourcash.org. There's a 1 in 2 chance that if you check your family's name in there, that they probably have some money there. And I talk about this a lot because folks come to me and they're like, man, I got $50 or I had $100 or $25. A lot of times when I talk about this with folks, it's actually the difference between them actually being able to pay their rent or not, or it's additional money to be actually get food or groceries or something along those lines. And so I point all of this out because I think we need to be doing all we can to get more money in the hands of people right now. I think that's one thing government is not doing well. I think one of the things that needs to be foundationally done a lot better is finding ways to get more money back to the people. And so claimyourcash.org, seriously check it out. Check your families out with all their different names. And if at the end of the presentation, raise your hand if you at least found some money there. It's always fun to point out.
So in case you're interested, I know that the Washington Department of Revenue is constantly, they love WSU grads. The Department of Ecology manages our cap and trade system, and that's very innovative. It's very future focused about sustainability. There's lots of opportunities for you to use your financial or accounting wisdom to do something good. I would encourage you to look at that. How about some other questions from anybody here or online? I'm not.
Yeah, in the back. Oh, here, let's wait for the mic just so the folks online can follow along.
Thank you for coming. I'm wondering, going back to the baby bonds with $4,000 per child born in the state.
Right.
I guess my first question is, where is this money coming from?
Good question.
Their dollars?
Yeah. So the first question is, where's the money coming from? And the answer is yes, ultimately from the state funds. Now, what I have argued is that the legislature should set money aside because they know these are going to be future needs. Again, people aren't getting individual check. These are money toward educational opportunities, small business investments, and housing investments, all of which the state is investing in heavily now. But by setting that money aside and allowing it to be invested in a similar way to how we invest kind of our pensions and other funds right now, allow that money to grow, then it grows to the amount to actually have an impact. And so to answer your question directly, what I've proposed is essentially have the legislature not spend money they would otherwise be spending now, set it aside to meet these future needs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then I'm also wondering if these withdrawals, when they do come to maturity, for the bondholder, will these be regulated? Will the withdrawals be regulated similar to like a 529 account?
So it's a great question. So yes, we call them baby bonds. And I just told you all about bonds. And trust me, I take bond terminology seriously. These actually aren't bonds. What we're having the legislature do is essentially take this money in the name of every child born pursuant to an Apple Health funded birth and put it in one pool of funds. And you don't become a beneficiary of that until later when you are eligible as a young adult. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is our state constitution prohibits the gifts of public funds, except for in situations of poverty. And so there's a carve out in our state constitution, which allows then, if you establish that someone was in poverty at birth and they are eligible beneficiary later, only if they're eligible later would they be able to claim those funds. So you navigate the constitutional issues with that. But also you want to make sure that those funds aren't in the name of someone who's like 4 or 5 or 6 years old, in which then that money denies them the opportunity to receive essential benefits that they might need at that point, even though they don't have access to those funds at that point. And so the funds do not exist for that person until they are claimed later. And so it is different than a bond in that sense, because a bond actually is a form of debt. This is not debt at all. This is literally setting money aside, investing it as a pool of funds to grow that fund. You know the beneficiaries, and then you can actuarially distribute that capital to that individual. It's not cash. They would then direct it to one of those 3 wealth building tools. Most of those systems that are already in place, this is why it's so critical, I think, to meet those future needs that we know the state's going to have, because then it creates that pool of fund to be able to meet those needs to reduce those capital barriers.
Okay, awesome. And then I guess my last question, thank you again, is how are we making sure, if this is coming from taxpayer dollars, that these baby bonds are contributing to financial prosperity? Like when we go back to education, how can we make sure that this money is going towards degrees or trades that are actually benefiting the entire community rather than something that's necessarily a waste?
Yes. All very good questions. So for those sitting here, it's kind of like, hey, how do you make sure this is actually working well? And that's always the push-pull that you're having, where you want to make sure you're giving autonomy to the person to figure out what's best for them. Maybe they want to go into the trades. Maybe they want to go to university. Maybe they want to start a small business, whatever the case may be, while at the same time making sure it's done responsibly. And it's one of the things that we actually set up as a part of the proposal is creating it's called the Washington Future Fund, by the way. This kind of larger baby bonds concept, the Washington Future Fund, is a Washington Future Fund committee that's looking at a lot of these issues where we don't want to be so prescriptive now, because these funds aren't going to be distributed for almost like 2 decades, right? So we're not even talking about like how to communicate that information at this point, other than it needs to be communicated, and that's part of what the legislation says, and that the committee actually wouldn't even form until about 5 years before the first distribution of the funds, for all the reasons you're talking about. Because you don't want to be saying, oh, well, this should be communicated by like sending out an email. I mean, like 15 years from now, people are gonna be like, what's an email, right? You see what I'm saying? So like you want to make sure that you're giving that flexibility. What's most important from my mind is to not have the legislature not spend the money now, set it aside start investing it to allow it to grow to meet these future needs. Because not only will it allow for more money to be available later that otherwise would have been spent and not even be there, but it allows for it to grow to meet these future needs, to lower the burden on taxpayers today, or taxpayers in the future, kind of all of you, by the way, right? So that you're not being, facing the consequences of not having the funds there, and then there's pressure on the state treasury at that point. I will say one of the things I love about this job as state treasurer is often politicians, if you're lucky, will think a year or two out, maybe to the next election if you're lucky. But everything we do in the treasurer's office is with a 5, 10, 15, 20-year horizon. And when you do that, that's what has the impact. I mean, Washington Future Fund, this baby bonds concept, has bipartisan co-sponsorship. That's what happens when you actually deal with long-term issues and bring people together with a shared mission on things. And so I say all that, which is, that's what I also love about finance and accounting and business and all this, is when you do these things the right way, you're thinking long-term, and you're kind of foundationally addressing the big needs that we have. And only with time can you really address these big issues. There's a lot of talk of like, oh, let's do this bill, or let's do this, and it's going to be transformative. Like, I'm just here to tell you the numbers don't line up like that. You can't just do those big things overnight. But when you do it and you set it up with a financial plan over time, like, you truly transform things in a major way. And that's something that's been a big focus of mine for all the reasons you're saying, because then you're thinking long-term and developing the system to make sure that the money is used efficiently and effectively, which might be a very different question then than it is right now in terms of how best to do that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Other questions? Yeah.
So my question is.
Hold on, Colin, let me- Colin,
Oh, we gotta get you a mic.
Thank you.
there's just a Zoom and they won't be able to hear you.
No worries.
There you go.
So my question is about something the legislature did last year in relation to the workforce education investment account and broader higher education. We saw historic revenue increases through the advanced computing surcharge tax that brings a lot more money into this account. But even with a lot more money coming into that account, we've seen cuts to financial aid. We've seen cuts to our public institutions and higher education as well. I'm curious about your perspective as state treasurer to some of the causes of that, even with the massive increase in revenue, as well as what you think the future of that account might be.
Well, I guess there's a lot to unpack with that. I'm going to say, and be consistent with what I was saying before, which is the legislature controls the purse. So ultimately, the legislature decides all aspects of this. They decide what tax policy to create, what comes in, and where that money goes. And ultimately, you hold them accountable if you like where it's going or not. I want to talk a little bit about actually the larger issue you're raising, which is kind of the money coming in for the state, which I think is worth highlighting, kind of the larger budget challenges also that took place last session, which is, Governor Inslee, his last task as governor was to propose a budget for the legislature to consider. For those who don't know, governor proposes a budget, legislature then passes the budget, and then the governor signs the budget, and that becomes the budget. Well, what was different this year, right? You had Governor Inslee on his last task before leaving as governor, proposed a budget, and it included $16 billion in new spending. That was $16 billion more than the projected revenue that the state was going to see. Well, that is what we call a shortfall. Right, like that does not align. That is an issue, and that created a lot of tension in the legislature, because I think it's a hallmark of one of the challenges we face in politics today, which is people are in their individual echo chambers, right? Whatever you're tracking on your social media, whatever it is in the world that you're getting a kind of a very narrow message related to that. So you had folks on the left who said, "Hey, there should be nothing but new taxes to pay for that, $16 billion in new spending." There are folks who said, "Hey, that's $16 billion in new spending. Like that one-time COVID money is not continuing. Like that's a problem." Like, those on the left who said, "Hey, new taxes to meet it," and those on the right who said, "No new taxes at all cuts." Well, what we had is with the new governor coming in, Governor Ferguson said, "Well, you know what? People say they want to compromise. People say they want to see people meet in the middle. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do half cuts and half new spending," and that pretty much pissed everyone off. Right? And then everyone got in their echo chambers. And those on, did we just score? Oh, I told you got to raise your hand and tell us. You can't just do two runs? Oh my goodness, that's awesome. I thought you were excited about moderation, meet people in the middle of politics. It's like, yeah, all right, Governor Ferguson, way to meet in the middle. Like, yeah, no, that's awesome. But So he's like, hey, let's meet in the middle. Let's meet in the middle. Half taxes and half cuts pissed everyone off. And then everyone got in their own echo chambers. And if you're on the right wing, you're hearing like biggest tax increase in history. And if you're on the left, you're hearing like austerity budget and nothing but cuts. Right? And so I give you that context that it is very important to step back. And the more you understand public financing, the better informed you are to actually be informed as to whether your legislators are meeting your expectations or not. And so the question you raise, I think that I give you that background because I think that's really important. Because there are things obviously that you're mentioning that are important and that you care about and you want to communicate to your legislators to prioritize. I think the more you kind of understand that context, the less it becomes, oh, I would love to help you, but the governor's talking cuts. Or I'd love to help you, but these folks don't want any new taxes or whatever the case may be. And I think the more you can be informed, ultimately, I'm going to end with how I started, which is you got to talk to your legislators on how to then spend the money that's there. Other questions? Yeah. Good to see you again. Hi.
No, it's great to see you again.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question in regards to a conversation that I'm sure you're having every day with the state legislature. But in about a 2-year period between 2021 and 2022, we saw a net decrease or a net loss, I should say, of median family or of households that make over $200,000. And that decrease was about 1,500 families in the state of Washington.
Let me make sure I'm tracking. 1,500, because these are numbers that are new to me. So
1,500 families that make over
$200,000. There's a reduction.
There's a reduction
in the amount of families in Washington making over $200,000.
Correct.
By number 15,000 families.
Correct.
I'm tracking.
1,500 families.
1,500 families. I'm tracking.
The total decrease, if I recall, was about 13,000, but we brought in about 11,000 new families.
Okay.
So in regards to that, we were just talking about a shortfall.
Yeah.
A lot of new programs like your baby bonds idea, which I love. You talked about that in your office last year. So how does that dictate policy, especially as we look towards new taxes, gas taxes, stuff like that?
Yeah.
How does that dictate policy like that?
Well, the challenges with baby bonds is I did not do a big push to have the funds set aside last session because the funds weren't there, right? For all the reasons we're talking about, right? Like cuts, taxes, all that. It was like you had the shortfall. They're trying to, it's not a situation where you say, hey, let's add an extra $150 million a year to set aside related to that. I could read the room related to that. It doesn't change my view on that and the view that I have that I know this is foundationally important, will save us money in the long run on doing this the right way. What was the second part of your question? Sorry, I want to make sure I fully answer.
Generally it was about how it dictates policy, but we've talked a lot about investments and how the state of Washington can invest money. So just how does that loss of income, how does that dictate stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's a good question because the money that is brought in is what we are investing until it is spent, right? So at any given time, we have, $8 or $12 billion exists. It's like your checking account. You have money that comes in. You're not spending it. Hopefully, not spending literally that same day, right? You have certain expenses. Maybe your rent's later in the month. You might have some food later that week, right? So there's always hopefully some money in the checking account, whatever that is. More the better, by the way. But whatever that is, because you don't want to. You're not like always running at zero. And so even if that money has been allocated, meaning they're planning on spending it throughout the year, there's always money sitting there. And so the increase of money coming in has contributed to our ability to raise funds. But over the last year, the legislature spending money, especially related to our reserves, which has always been more easy to invest because that's money that's not going out the door. That's just money sitting there, has reduced our investment returns, even though our interest returns on those investments have been strong. There's been less of that money to invest. And it's something I always raise to the legislature for the reasons you're saying, which is I think lots of times legislators will just look at money as if it's like, oh, here's this money and then I spend it, like every dollar is equal. Well, if you spend that money, that was money being invested that's now can't be invested, which was money being generated for other things that you liked that now can't happen. Right? There are compounding effects for all the reasons I think you're saying. Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for being here. I hope you were educated as I was from this. I'm very interested in the financial literacy aspect, and I hope maybe we'll talk more about that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I'll let you all go off to your other meetings that you have and dinner. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much.